Amara believed time was on her side. Not because anyone promised it to her, but because her life had never told her otherwise. At 27, she moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had never truly failed. Every plan she made worked out. Every risk she took rewarded her. And every morning she woke up believing tomorrow would wait for her, patient and obedient. She lived in a fast-moving city where success was loud and weakness was hidden. Amara fit perfectly into that world. She dressed sharply, spoke clearly, and walked with purpose. Her reflection in the mirror was something she trusted. Smooth skin, bright eyes, steady hands, signs that life was still opening, not closing. To her, youth was power. She believed beauty meant control, and control meant safety. As long as she stayed ahead, of time, of people, of mistakes, nothing could touch her. Amara worked hard, but she also judged hard. She looked down on people who struggled, even if she never said it out loud. In her mind, struggle was a choice. If someone was poor, they had failed to plan. If someone was old and tired, they had wasted their best years. Old age made her uncomfortable. She did not like how slow old people walked. She hated how they asked for help. Their shaking hands, tired eyes, and careful steps reminded her of something she refused to face, that everything strong eventually weakens. So she avoided them. She crossed the road when she saw them ahead. She pretended not to hear them when they spoke. She told herself she was busy, that her time mattered more. Time, to Amara, was something she owned. Her phone was always full, meetings, deadlines, goals. She hated silence. Silence forced her to think, and thinking led to questions she didn't want to answer. She measured her worth by progress and her value by results. There was no room for slowing down. Family felt distant to her. When her mother complained about aching joints or rising costs, Amara felt irritation instead of concern. She told herself she would help later, when things were calmer, when she had more time. But later always moved further away. Friends from her past stopped calling. They said she had changed. Amara believed they were jealous. Romance never lasted. Love required patience, and patience felt like a waste. She believed feelings could wait. One evening, as the city prepared for night, Amara walked through a crowded street. People rushed past each other, chasing homes, dreams, or rest. Horns blared. Lights flickered. The world felt alive and demanding. Near the roadside, an old woman sat quietly. She wore worn clothes, clean but faded. Her back was bent slightly, her hands resting in her lap. Her face carried deep lines, not just from age, but from years of waiting and watching. The old woman lifted her eyes as Amara approached. There was no begging in her gaze. No anger. Only a strange heaviness, as if she carried many unspoken words. She leaned forward slightly, as if she wanted to speak. Amara barely noticed. Her phone buzzed. Her mind was already somewhere else. She stepped past the woman without slowing down, without a glance, without a thought. The old woman watched her walk away. Amara disappeared into the crowd, young, confident, certain. The old woman remained where she was, unseen and unheard. And time kept moving. The old woman stayed where the city forgot her. Day after day, she sat near the busy road, close enough to feel the heat of passing cars, close enough to hear people laugh, argue, and dream. Yet no one truly saw her. She had become part of the background, like dust on a wall or cracks in the pavement. Her life moved slowly. Mornings came with stiff joints and empty hunger. Nights came with cold winds and long memories. She owned very little, a thin cloth to keep warm, a small bag with nothing important inside, and her thoughts. Those thoughts were heavy. She had once been young too. She remembered days when she walked fast, just like the people who passed her now. She remembered believing that time would always wait. That mistakes could be fixed later. That kindness could be delayed. Now, later had arrived. People treated her like a burden. Shopkeepers waved her away. Drivers shouted at her to move. Strangers avoided her eyes as if age were a disease that could spread. Still, she held herself with quiet dignity. She never shouted. Never begged loudly. When she spoke, her voice was soft, not weak, but tired. Her words were not meant to shame anyone. They were warnings wrapped in care. Sometimes, she tried to offer advice. She told people to slow down. To listen. To hold their loved ones close. To remember that life does not move in one direction forever. Most people laughed. Some rolled their eyes. Others brushed past her without a word. And then there was Amara. The old woman noticed Amara long before Amara ever noticed her. She saw the way the young woman walked, fast, sharp, full of certainty. She saw the same fire she once carried in herself. Every time Amara passed, the old woman felt a pull in her chest. She tried to speak to her once. Just a few gentle words. Not to criticize, not to lecture, only to remind. But Amara reacted with impatience. She saw the old woman as nothing more than an interruption. A symbol of everything she feared becoming. To Amara, the old woman represented wasted years and broken dreams. So she ignored her. When the old woman spoke again another day, Amara mocked her quietly, through her expression, through her tone, through the way she walked away without listening. The old woman did not argue. She did not feel anger. She felt sorrow. She watched Amara disappear into the crowd, surrounded by noise and ambition. The old woman knew that look. She had worn it once, confidence mixed with blindness. As the sun dipped lower and the city lights flickered on, the old woman sat alone, her eyes following shadows. She whispered to herself, not in bitterness, but in pain. Some lessons are only learned when it is too late. She stayed there as the street emptied, holding on to the hope that one day, somehow, the young woman would hear the words she refused to listen to now. But time did not slow down. And neither did Amara. Amara's life moved forward quickly, faster than she ever expected, and exactly how she wanted. Opportunities opened their doors for her without hesitation. Promotions came one after another. People spoke her name with respect, sometimes even with envy. She moved into better spaces, wore finer clothes, and learned how to smile in ways that made others believe she had everything under control. From the outside, her life looked perfect. Amara enjoyed the attention. She enjoyed being admired. Success felt like proof that her beliefs were right, that struggle was a choice, that hard hearts survived better than soft ones. She told herself she had earned everything. But with every step forward, something quietly fell behind. Friends who once laughed with her now spoke less. When they tried to share their worries or pain, Amara listened only halfway. She gave advice instead of comfort. Solutions instead of understanding. Slowly, they stopped calling. Family gatherings became rare. When she did attend, she felt out of place. Stories about illness, financial stress, or aging relatives bored her. She checked her phone often, counting the minutes until she could leave. She told herself she would reconnect later, when her life was less busy. Later never came. Romantic relationships faded as well. Amara wanted admiration, not vulnerability. She expected strength, not emotion. When partners needed patience or reassurance, she grew distant. Love felt demanding, and Amara did not like demands. She stayed busy instead. The city rewarded her speed. The faster she moved, the more it applauded her. She began to believe that slowing down meant losing everything she had worked for. Sometimes, though, when she was alone, cracks appeared. At night, silence pressed against her chest. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why success felt so heavy. She dismissed the feeling quickly. Fatigue, she told herself. Nothing more. As months turned into years, Amara began to notice changes she did not like. Her reflection held shadows under the eyes. Lines appeared when she frowned. The idea of aging crept into her thoughts, unwanted and sharp. She worked harder, pushed herself more, refused rest. Time was still something she believed she could control, if she stayed ahead of it. Every now and then, she passed the old woman again. Always in the same place. Always quiet. Always watching. Amara noticed her just enough to feel irritation. The old woman's presence disturbed her peace. It reminded her of weakness, of endings, of a future she refused to imagine. So she avoided her gaze. One afternoon, as Amara rushed to an important meeting, she nearly collided with the old woman. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The old woman's face showed no blame, only recognition. It unsettled Amara. She brushed past her without a word. The meeting went well. Applause followed. Compliments poured in. Another step up the ladder. Yet later that night, alone in her apartment, Amara felt empty. She had reached a milestone she once dreamed of. A position many would envy. A life that looked successful on every surface. But there was no celebration waiting for her. No one to share the moment with. No warmth in the silence. She sat by the window, city lights glowing below, and felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. Not sadness. Not fear. But a quiet realization that something important had been ignored for too long. She pushed the thought away. Tomorrow was waiting. And she still believed she had time. Amara had always believed she was in control. She planned everything, her career, her schedule, even her emotions. But life, she was beginning to realize, had a way of slipping through the cracks, no matter how tightly one tried to hold it. The first sign came quietly, almost unnoticeable. A friend she had counted on for years stopped returning calls. At first, she told herself it was busy schedules or forgetfulness. But when weeks passed, she could no longer ignore the truth. People could leave, even when she thought they would stay. Then, her mother grew ill. Amara had always considered her mother's complaints minor inconveniences, distractions from her own pressing life. But now, seeing her mother frail and weary, she felt a strange twinge of fear. There was no time to prepare, no plan that could fix this. The realization was terrifying. Time, she discovered, could not be controlled. Grief came in waves, sudden and unfamiliar. But Amara did not know how to mourn. She had spent her life dismissing weakness, avoiding vulnerability, and ignoring emotion. Now, grief pressed against her chest, and she did not know how to respond. She felt anger more than sadness, frustration more than loss. The unfairness of it all enraged her. Why could she not handle this as she handled everything else? Why did life insist on reminding her that she was not invincible? And then the old woman appeared again. Amara saw her outside a small cafe, shuffling slowly along the edge of the street. Her eyes lifted, gentle but full of weight. She reached out, as if to offer some comfort, some warning, some piece of understanding that Amara had ignored for years. But anger rose in Amara like a wall. She could not accept help from someone she had always deemed irrelevant. She turned sharply, walking away without a word, pretending the old woman did not exist. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the shame of realizing, too late, that she might have needed that guidance. Days passed, but the weight did not lift. Amara found herself making choices she had once thought impossible. She ignored calls from loved ones. She avoided hospital visits. She prioritized work over people, even as the emptiness inside her grew louder. Each decision, selfish and protective, closed a door she could never reopen. She was sealing her path. The loss became unavoidable when her closest friend, the one she had neglected for so long, moved far away without notice, leaving only a brief message that life had moved on. The message stung more than anything else because it reminded her that she had ignored countless small signs, warnings from people, from time itself, from her own conscience. And now, she could not undo the damage. She found herself walking the streets late at night, alone, searching for something she could not name. The city felt harsher, emptier. She passed the old woman once more, who did not speak but simply watched her, as if saying, "You were warned. You ignored it." Amara quickened her pace, swallowing tears she refused to acknowledge. She could not face the truth yet, that her pride, her obsession with control, and her disregard for others had brought her to a place she did not recognize. The world was not forgiving her mistakes. Time did not pause for regret. The consequences had arrived quietly but with unshakable force. In these moments, she glimpsed something she had never truly understood: vulnerability was not weakness. Love and connection were not distractions. And every moment ignored, the sick mother, the distant friend, the quiet words of the old woman, was a brick in a wall she had built around herself. But still, she resisted reflection. Still, she refused to slow down. Instead, she made a choice to protect herself, her image, her career, her sense of control. She turned her back on the grief, on the people who still reached for her, and on the quiet lessons of the old woman. It was a selfish decision, but it was hers to make. And as she walked away, the city lights blurred into a haze of movement and noise, echoing the emptiness inside her. For the first time, she truly understood, time did not belong to her. Life was not something she could bend or control. And the losses she had ignored were only the beginning. Yet Amara could not stop. She could not allow herself to feel fully, not yet. Not while her plans still demanded attention, not while ambition still whispered promises she wanted to believe. The consequences of ignoring warnings were real, but they were not yet fully visible. She walked forward, blinded by pride, unaware that each step carried her closer to a life she would not recognize. And all the while, the old woman watched. Not with anger. Not with judgment. But with the sorrow of someone who had seen the future clearly, and knew it was already slipping through Amara's fingers. Years passed. Time, once her obedient servant, had begun to slip through Amara's fingers. She had always believed she could control her future, shape it with hard work, ambition, and sharp decisions. But now, life moved faster than she could chase, leaving her breathless, bewildered, and afraid. Her reflection changed first. Once bright eyes now carried shadows of sleepless nights. Lines crept across her forehead and around her mouth, reminders that youth does not last forever. Her body, which she had cared for with discipline and pride, no longer obeyed her commands as easily. Fatigue became her constant companion, and she began to notice the tremors of time she could not outrun. Career success, once effortless, began to waver. Promotions slowed. Opportunities that had once opened for her freely now seemed reserved for younger, hungrier faces. The offices she had commanded with confidence were now populated by people she barely recognized, speaking a language of ambition she could no longer fully understand. She felt the sting of being replaced, of relevance slipping away despite her efforts to hold on to it. Her relationships fared no better. Friends who had once depended on her, or whom she had depended on, had moved on. Some were married, some had children, some had disappeared from her life entirely. When she reached out, she discovered that her absence had created a distance too wide to cross. Calls went unanswered. Invitations went unextended. She realized, too late, that human connections cannot be scheduled or managed like tasks in her calendar. Romantic relationships became fleeting shadows of what they might have been. Amara had always sought admiration, not vulnerability, and now she was alone with no one to admire her accomplishments. She remembered the passion she had once pursued but realized she had never learned to nurture it. Love required patience, and patience had never been her strength. Sometimes, she caught herself staring into the mirror, searching for the woman she used to be. She looked for confidence, vitality, beauty, but what stared back was a stranger. She resembled the people she had once looked down upon, frail, unnoticed, struggling to be seen. Every hurried step, every ignored warning, every decision made in pride and self-interest had brought her here. Regret arrived in quiet moments, often late at night. She remembered the old woman, the one she had passed, ignored, and dismissed countless times. The memory pricked her conscience, an ache she could not soothe. But pride was a stubborn companion, refusing to let her bow her head in humility. She told herself that remembering did not matter, that the past could not touch her now. Yet, it could, and it did. Illness began to shadow her steps. What had once been small inconveniences, aches, tiredness, fleeting pains, became persistent reminders of her mortality. The strong body she had counted on so heavily betrayed her. She was forced to slow down, whether she liked it or not. Each day demanded acknowledgement of limits she had never respected. Even her surroundings became a reflection of loss. The apartments, the cars, the possessions, all of the symbols of success she had chased so fervently, felt empty without anyone to share them. Silence echoed through spaces once filled with plans, ambition, and laughter. She realized that wealth without love, power without connection, and beauty without empathy was a hollow victory. She began to see the world differently, but not enough to change. Young people rushed past her as she once had rushed past others, eyes fixed on goals, ignoring warnings. She tried to offer advice once, to remind someone of what she had learned too late, but they walked away, just as she had walked away from the old woman years before. The bitterness of recognition burned, but the habit of ignoring vulnerability remained ingrained. Amara's heart felt heavy with the weight of everything she had postponed, reconciliations, kindness, forgiveness. She saw people who had once depended on her, now thriving without her influence. She saw the fragility of life reflected in others and knew she had wasted years ignoring it. But still, she moved forward, attempting to preserve dignity instead of seeking connection, chasing safety instead of meaning. Isolation became her constant companion. Friends were gone. Family had grown distant. Even colleagues treated her with polite acknowledgement rather than genuine respect or affection. The life she had meticulously built around ambition had, over time, become a cage. She had prepared for everything except the most essential truth, that human connection cannot be planned or postponed, and that time waits for no one. Late at night, Amara often found herself recalling the old woman once more. She imagined the lines on her face, the tired hands, the quiet sorrow. And she realized, with a jolt she could not ignore, that every choice she had made to ignore others had prepared her for this solitude. She could see the path she had walked, the steps of pride, ambition, and impatience, and she recognized the inevitability of the consequences. She could no longer pretend that life was fully in her control. She could no longer dismiss aging, illness, or loneliness. The future she had once thought she owned had arrived, and it was nothing like she had imagined. And as she sat alone in her quiet apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her success and the echoes of her losses, Amara finally faced a painful truth: she had built everything she wanted, yet she had prepared for nothing she truly needed. Time had moved forward, unstoppable and indifferent. And she had spent too long ignoring the lessons it tried to teach her. If you want, I can continue with. Time had finally caught up with Amara. She moved slower now, not because she wanted to, but because her body no longer obeyed. Every step carried the memory of years she had refused to honor. Her once steady hands shook with fatigue. Her eyes, once sharp and alert, now blurred with the weight of sleepless nights and the realization of a life spent in pride. The world treated her as she had once treated it, invisibly. People brushed past without noticing her. Shopkeepers no longer greeted her warmly. Young people passed with eyes fixed straight ahead, not realizing that she had once walked in their shoes, just as she had ignored warnings herself. She was now the same figure she had once dismissed, the quiet, overlooked, old woman by the roadside. Hunger gnawed at her, not just the emptiness of food, but the emptiness of connection. Meals were eaten alone, in silence. There were no companions to share laughter or memories. Loneliness had become her closest friend, following her wherever she went, reminding her with every quiet hour that life had moved on without her. Illness added weight to each day. Small aches became chronic pains. She stumbled where she once walked confidently. Her reflection in the mirror was unrecognizable, not merely old, but diminished by neglect, by years of ignoring what truly mattered. And yet, the lessons she had refused to learn in youth now appeared vividly, almost unbearably. She remembered the old woman she had passed countless times, always ignored, always dismissed. She remembered the sorrowful gaze, the gentle warnings, the quiet dignity. And now she saw clearly what she had once refused to see, that the future she had mocked had been speaking to her all along. Flashbacks hit her unexpectedly, often at the worst moments. She remembered the friends she had abandoned, the family she had neglected, the lovers she had pushed away. She remembered the small opportunities to show compassion, to offer kindness, to slow down and reflect, and how she had walked past them all, believing she had all the time in the world. Now, those missed chances became walls around her, each one a reminder that she had built her life without the foundation of empathy. Amara tried to reach out to younger people now, but it was often too late. She spoke gently, warning them of pride, impatience, and the false sense of control that she had once clung to. But they ignored her, hurried past her, or simply dismissed her presence. Their laughter, chatter, and busyness reminded her of the very moments when she had been the same, unaware, uninterested, and blind to the lessons being offered. This mirrored existence struck her with a profound clarity. She was no longer the woman who had thought she owned time. She had become the very person she had once scorned, overlooked, forgotten, fragile, and alone. The realization was crushing. She felt the weight of her choices pressing on her chest, making each breath heavier than the last. It was not just the loss of people, wealth, or status, it was the understanding that every moment ignored, every warning dismissed, every act of pride had built this life of solitude. Yet, in the midst of this despair, a small spark remained. A quiet awareness, a fragile recognition that she could still act, even if she could not undo the past. She began to see that life, even in its final stages, offered lessons, not for revenge or punishment, but for reflection and understanding. Amara noticed the subtle ways the city mirrored her past actions. Young people ignored the elderly, people rushed past those in need, and pride often outweighed compassion. She saw herself in every overlooked face, every discarded moment, every silent plea for attention. And in that recognition, she began to understand the interconnectedness of life, the way her own choices had shaped her environment, and the way neglect, arrogance, and impatience had consequences beyond what she had imagined. Sometimes she stopped on street corners, watching the world continue without her. She observed the young rushing to meetings, lovers holding hands without thought of the years ahead, friends laughing with abandon. And she felt both sorrow and understanding. She mourned not only for her own losses, but for the ways in which she had contributed to a world that ignored wisdom, kindness, and empathy. She tried small acts of attention where she could. A word of guidance to a young passerby. A hand offered to help someone stumble. She smiled at people she passed, even if they didn't notice. These acts were quiet, almost invisible, but they mattered to her. They were a way to reconnect with the life she had long ignored. The nights were hardest. Lying awake, she relived every choice she had made, moments of cruelty, silence, avoidance. Each memory cut like a knife, and each one carried a lesson she had ignored in youth. Sleep came reluctantly, haunted by the echoes of what could have been. Yet gradually, a subtle shift occurred. The anger she had once felt at life began to soften into understanding. The bitterness of being ignored, dismissed, or overlooked began to transform into empathy. She saw clearly that life had mirrored her own actions back to her. The world had treated her as she had treated it. Karma, she realized, not punishment, but reflection. Amara could not undo the years she had lost. She could not bring back those who had drifted away, nor could she reclaim the moments she had dismissed. But she could act differently now. Even in her frailty, even in her solitude, she could choose to engage, to give, to acknowledge what mattered. It was a slow process. Each day required effort. Each interaction was a reminder of the years wasted. And yet, with every small act of attention, every quiet moment of reflection, Amara felt a shift, a growing sense that life, though harsh, had offered her a chance to understand, if not to reclaim. By the end of each day, as she rested her weary body and closed her eyes, she recognized something she had never understood in youth, that life is not measured solely by ambition, wealth, or power. It is measured by empathy, connection, and awareness. And while she had ignored those lessons for decades, the understanding now, even if late, offered her a fragile sense of peace. Amara was no longer the woman who thought she controlled time. She had become the very thing she had ignored, vulnerable, unseen, fragile. But she had also become aware. And in that awareness, there was the faintest glimmer of redemption. If you want, I can continue with. Amara had spent a lifetime moving forward, always chasing, always planning, always believing she had control. Yet, at this stage of her life, something shifted. Time, once obedient, now pressed heavily upon her. She felt the weight of years, of choices, of moments ignored. She had become the old woman she had once walked past without notice, the one whose eyes had always carried a quiet sorrow. One afternoon, she found herself walking through the same busy street she had known decades ago. The air smelled the same, a mix of food, dust, and distant rain. Children laughed on the sidewalks. Young couples held hands, oblivious to the world around them. And there, across the street, she saw her younger self. The sight stopped her entirely. There she was, bright-eyed, confident, and rushing as always, the same Amara who had once believed time was hers to command. Her posture was upright, her stride full of certainty. Every move was a reminder of the woman she had once been, ambitious, impatient, and blind to the lessons life tried to teach. At first, she could hardly believe it. The world did not bend in strange ways, she was not dreaming. But the recognition was undeniable. This young woman, full of ambition and disregard, was her. Amara felt a jolt of pain unlike anything she had known. She was face to face with the truth she had spent her life avoiding. She had ignored her own future self. Every dismissive glance, every moment of impatience, every act of pride that had hurt others had been a warning she had failed to heed. And now, life had returned the lesson to her with unyielding clarity. Time seemed to fold in on itself. She could see the path of her life stretching behind her, every choice and consequence laid bare. She remembered the friends she had lost, the family she had neglected, the love she had abandoned, and the old woman she had passed countless times. Every single moment had been a mirror, and she was only now realizing it. The young Amara walked past, completely unaware, absorbed in her ambitions, rushing toward a future she had yet to understand. And the old Amara, the one who had become fragile, overlooked, and alone, watched with the weight of a lifetime pressing on her shoulders. Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of anger, nor of despair, but of deep, sorrowful recognition. She understood fully, finally, that she had been the old woman all along. The one who watched, the one ignored, the one whose words and warnings went unheard. Every warning she had dismissed, every piece of advice she had ignored, had been her own life calling back to her. The realization was crushing. The pain of seeing what she had become, what she had allowed herself to become, cut through her like a cold wind. There was no spectacle, no magic, no fantasy. Only truth. The truth that she had ignored the only guidance that could have mattered, the guidance of her own life, her own choices, and the wisdom she had refused to see. Amara felt an overwhelming sense of regret. Every opportunity for compassion, every moment to slow down, every chance to value connection over ambition, it had passed. And yet, the recognition of that truth was undeniable. It was quiet, heavy, and real. She looked around the street, at the faces she had once dismissed, at the young people rushing past, at the world moving with indifference, and she saw the reflection of herself in every overlooked glance, every ignored warning. Life had mirrored back her own choices, and she could no longer pretend that she was in control. For a long moment, Amara simply stood. The young version of herself disappeared into the crowd, but the old Amara remained, rooted in understanding. She had finally seen the cycle in full. She had become what she had once ignored, and now she recognized the truth of it all. The weight of years, mistakes, and missed chances pressed upon her chest, yet within it, a strange clarity emerged. She understood why she had suffered, why she had felt unseen, why the world had mirrored her actions. She had lived her life ignoring warnings, dismissing wisdom, and prioritizing control over compassion. Now, confronted with the truth, she saw the entire path of cause and effect. This understanding did not erase her pain. It did not restore the friendships, the love, or the time she had lost. It did not undo the loneliness she had carried for years. But it gave her something else, a deep, sorrowful awareness of the moral and emotional cost of her choices. She felt a quiet sense of responsibility. Not for punishment, but for understanding. She could not change the past, but she could acknowledge it, honor it, and act differently in the time that remained. She could offer what she had refused to give others, even if it was too late to undo what had been done. The street moved on around her, unaware of the revelation unfolding in the quiet heart of the old woman standing there. Life continued, indifferent and rushing, but for Amara, time had stopped long enough for her to see clearly. She understood that the old woman she had ignored, the friends she had lost, the family she had neglected, all of it was a reflection of her own choices. And she had finally seen it. The truth settled over her like a heavy cloak. She had ignored her own future, she had dismissed her own warnings, and now she had become the person she once overlooked. The realization was painful beyond words, and yet, it was unflinchingly honest. Amara did not speak. She did not cry out. She simply allowed herself to feel the weight of her life in full. And in that moment, the circle was complete. She had finally faced the only confrontation that truly mattered, herself. The world around her continued, but Amara remained still, carrying the knowledge that her life had been a mirror all along. The pain of ignoring her own guidance, the sorrow of all the moments she had wasted, and the haunting clarity of her past choices formed a truth that she could neither escape nor deny. For the first time, she understood the ultimate lesson: time is not something one owns. Life is not something one controls. The guidance ignored, the warnings brushed aside, the compassion denied, all of it returns, eventually, in the only way it can. Amara had been the old woman all along. And now, finally, she saw it. Amara stood at the edge of the street where the world had once passed her by, where the young version of herself had hurried toward a future she could not yet understand. Years of ambition, pride, and neglect had brought her here, older, frail, and finally aware. The city moved around her, full of noise, motion, and urgency, but she no longer rushed. She moved slowly now, not out of weakness, but out of understanding. Each step carried the weight of decades, the weight of choices made and ignored, of warnings unheeded and moments lost. And yet, in this slowing, there was a glimmer of possibility. She saw a young girl stumble on the sidewalk, her book spilling to the ground. For a moment, Amara hesitated, the memory of her own youth flashing in her mind, the times she had ignored those who needed help, the warnings she had ignored, the kindness she had refused to give. Then, instinctively, she bent down, picked up the scattered pages, and handed them to the girl with a gentle smile. The girl looked up, surprised, and then smiled back. She did not recognize the woman before her. She had no reason to. But the small exchange carried something profound, a recognition that compassion, even when delayed, could still touch the world. Amara felt a warmth she had not known in decades. It was fragile, quiet, but undeniable. For the first time in years, she realized that redemption was not about undoing the past. It was about acting now, however late, with honesty, empathy, and grace. She could not reclaim what had been lost, but she could honor it by living fully in the moment, by offering what she had once denied. Her steps grew steadier. She helped a man carry groceries across the street. She offered a kind word to a woman who had tripped on the curb. She paused to watch children play, letting herself feel joy without judgment. These acts were small, almost invisible, but for Amara, they were monumental. They were proof that even the most battered and overlooked life could leave a mark on the world. And then she saw her own reflection in a shop window, lines of age, eyes filled with years of experience, posture slightly bent but upright in dignity. She no longer recoiled from the image. She no longer feared the frailty she once scorned. Instead, she acknowledged it, embraced it, and understood that this was what she had become. And yet, it was not the end, it was the beginning of a different kind of life, one measured not by ambition or youth, but by empathy, awareness, and connection. The old woman, once ignored by the young Amara, had returned to the world with a quiet purpose. She offered kindness without expectation, guidance without judgment. People may not notice. They may not even respond. But the act itself mattered. Each gesture was a seed, and though she might not see it grow, it could still flourish in the lives of those she touched. Amara reflected on her life, on the years she had spent chasing control and status. She thought of the friends she had lost, the family she had neglected, the love she had abandoned. The pain of regret was still present, but it no longer dominated her. Instead, it served as a teacher, reminding her of what truly mattered. She realized that life, even at its end, had given her one last chance to act with the heart she had long ignored. She walked slowly through the streets she had once hurried past, noticing the faces of strangers, the small acts of generosity, the brief smiles of recognition. Each one was a reminder that connection, compassion, and awareness were the true measures of a life well lived. Even in her solitude, she could still give, still share, still make a difference. Amara found a quiet bench in a small park. She sat and watched the world move around her, feeling the rhythm of life in a new way. She no longer feared aging. She no longer resented vulnerability. She understood that every line on her face, every ache in her body, every memory of loss was a testament to a life that had been lived fully, if imperfectly. And in that quiet reflection, she smiled. Not a triumphal smile, but a gentle, knowing one. She had finally understood that time is not something we own. Life is not something we control. But what we do with the moments we are given, how we treat others, how we show kindness, how we recognize the humanity around us, that is where meaning resides. Amara had been given a chance, perhaps too late, perhaps just in time. And she chose to take it. Even as she closed her eyes at the end of the day, she did so with grace, with awareness, and with the quiet satisfaction of a life that, though flawed, had finally found its purpose. The city moved on, indifferent yet alive. People continued their hurried paths, unaware of the small acts of compassion unfolding among them. But for Amara, it no longer mattered if they noticed. What mattered was that she had seen, understood, and acted. She had offered kindness in the only way left to her, freely, quietly, without expectation. In the end, the story was not about lost time, wealth, or youth. It was about seeing, understanding, and choosing to act with empathy. Amara had become the woman she once ignored, and in embracing that truth, she found a measure of peace. And that was enough.